enhance well-being by having a much broader color light source. We can address safety issues at night by appealing to a specific spectral response to maintain dark adaptation. I'm going to spend quite some time on this later. We can enhance performance by the medical doctors. Medical doctors now are being asked to make critical color judgments with 80 CRI lamps. Cannot do. We need to be moving to 95 CRI or above in order to make critical color decisions. So I'm really talking about three things here. One is temporal flexibility, the idea that we can change spectrum throughout the day, which is well recognized to support circadian balance. Dark adaptation, which means that we are not tripping and falling at night, and trips and falls are a major cause of death and injury for people 65 and older. This is something that hospitals are very concerned about. And then, of course, is color rendering, is allowing doctors to be able to see inside the room. So these are some of the kinds of things that we can do on a temporal basis, is that we can go from very low color temperatures in the 2000 Kelvin region all the way to 10,000 or above, which matches the kind of variations that our eyes have evolved under. Our eyes are used to this biologically, and to some degree culturally. Okay? But this is what our eyes and what our biology expects to see, but we don't see it in traditional design. I'm going to go into this in more detail. We can also move into high color rendering light sources. So this is showing a black body radiator having great color. It's showing a traditional LED, and then the red line is a 95 CRI LED. So this is about as close to a black body radiator as we're going to get. This would be perfect for color. And so anybody that's doing critical color work, like a doctor, would want to have this light source, and significantly more color rendering capability. So what are the objectives of this project that I'm working on? And so we're faced with this massive relighting effort. All the hospitals are going to be changing their lighting. And the issue is, do they change to LED with fluorescent performance, or do they change to solid state LED with circadian performance? So our objective, and what we were asked to do, was to come up with a standard protocol that the hospitals could use in the relighting effort. They're going to be spending the money anyway. Okay? All hospitals are going to be doing this because they're moving from fluorescent to LED. So we were to come up with a series of integrated strategies. And these are 5 or 6 integrated strategies for circadian protocol. We were asked to prototype this in a laboratory environment, bring in the medical people, the biologists, and the architects, all to work in a team to find out what really would work. And then develop a standard specification that can be rolled out system-wide across the 5 hospitals in California. So these are sort of the 3 things that I'm helping to lead at the university. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the core protocol that we've evolved up to this point in time. Again, it's still a laboratory exercise that we're working with hospitals on and with the biologists, but we've worked out most of the protocol. That's what I'm going to share today. So in terms of a little bit of background, there's three essential elements on the background in this. The first one's circadian sensitivity. The second one is dark adaptation, and the third one is color rendering. And this is sort of to fundamentally support the mission of a hospital environment are these three core objectives. Okay? So the first one is circadian sensitivity. And most of the architects in here, including myself, have spent most of our careers looking at lighting design based on visual pathways. When we design a space, we're developing based on visual signals and trying to maintain contrast and visibility. Well, it turns out there's a whole second layer of light response that follows a biological pathway that is the prime driver for our hormone balance. Okay? And this has been a relatively new, new development. The kind of work that I've been doing for many years in lighting design is really appealing to this level, the visual response, looking at the RGB color system and the rod sensitivity, looking at contrast sensitivity at low light levels. And typically, this has been all of my sort of background. Okay? But in the last 50 years or so, they found out that there's a biological pathway to lighting that influences our hormones. And my advisor at Berkeley was actually the one on the team that found out that there was another receptor in the eye, the melanopsin receptor, that was responsible for non-visual information. It was responsible for providing biological information based on spectrum. And they found that spectrum was the big driver on hormones, and it was driving melatonin. And this was not visual, and this was light that was, that's my sister's. That the biological pathway, something that architects and lighting designers had no experience with. And so the biologists were now telling us that there was this secondary pathway that was really driving our melanopsin receptor, a new receptor that they found. So this is a specialized receptor that is responsible for our melatonin regulation. And it's both intensity and spectrally sensitive. So the main issue here was that melatonin is one of the foundation hormones that drives a whole other series of hormones. You all recognize melatonin for sleep, but it's also a foundation hormone for other wellness issues. And it's critically controlled in lighting design. So lighting designers have enormous impact on this relative to both intensity and spectrum. So what I'm showing here is the diurnal variations in melatonin. And if you look at the blue-green graph here, you'll see that at 6 o'clock in the morning, the melatonin starts declining. And then throughout the day, it's very low level. And then it starts building up towards midnight to a maximum, and then goes through this kind of oscillating cycle. For anybody that does spectrum measurements or light measurements or daylighting measurements, you'll all recognize this graph. And what it is, it's the inverse to the correlated color temperature for daylight, which of course makes a lot of sense because that's how our eyes have evolved. This is an exact overlay of the inverse of what the spectral distribution is of daylight. It makes sense because that's how our eyes have evolved. Our eyes have evolved, and it's a one-to-one correlation between the spectral distribution and our melatonin. So the main issue is that this is what our biology wants to see inside spaces, whether it's residential or office or hospital, it doesn't matter. But what our eyes want to see is this in order to maintain the right hormone balance. But the problem is that our lighting design for both residential, healthcare, hospital design doesn't do that. Okay? There's a disconnect in how we light spaces. So this is looking at the kind of variation that we would typically see outdoors. Is that at noon, a very strong bias towards the blue, and as the sun starts setting, we start seeing a progressive shift towards the red-orange, but it's also characterized as a relatively smooth spectrum, and it also has color content in all wavelengths. So this is what our eyes want to see, but this is not what we're putting into hospitals. Okay? Hospital light doesn't change. It's very spiky. It's very poor color. and doesn't change its spectral content throughout the day. Yet our eyes have evolved under this, and our hormones expect to see this, okay, in order to maintain balance. Okay. So there were a number of key strategies that we were looking at. We were evolving in some of these early design efforts. And one was critically to reduce blue exposure at night. In other words, any time after sunset, no exposure to blue light. Okay. No. And then throughout the day, increase the exposure to blue light. And this is because the melanopsin receptor is very sensitive to the blue end of the spectrum, and any amount of blue light is going to reduce the amount of melatonin and disrupt your circadian balance. So if you look at sort of the sensitivity of the melanopsin receptor, it's very, very effective in the blue end of the spectrum. So any light that's in the blue end of the spectrum is going to have a very significant effect on melatonin concentration. And so that could be very good in the morning when you're waking up. It's 7 o'clock in the morning, you want to wake up, you want to have a lot of light. But if it's 8 o'clock at night and you get exposed to this kind of light, it's going to disrupt your melatonin, going to affect your sleep, going to upset your hormone balance. What I'm showing here are three distributions. Okay? I'm showing you the normal photopic distribution. This is the sensitivity to color that we all have. But what I really want you to look at is the dotted line here, which is the melanopsin sensitivity curve. So this is the receptor in your eye that controls, impacts your melatonin concentration. And so what I'm showing here as an overlay, this blue graph is the spectral distribution for a standard blue pump LED. And what you'll see is that there's a very strong peak in the blue pump that matches the melanopsin sensitivity. So this is of great concern, okay, because if we use standard LEDs at nighttime, what we're going to have is a very significant disruption problem relative to our hormone balance. And these things are one-to-one relationship. So we're very mindful of the blue pumps on fluorescent phosphors and LED phosphors in hospital design. And probably the worst thing that we could be doing is be putting high color temperature light sources in hospital environments. It appears to be what we're doing. There are lots of folks very concerned about this, and there's already beginning regulatory policy on limiting blue light at night. The AMA, the American Medical Association, has already issued some directives out to the medical community to limit blue light exposure at night. Okay? We're starting now to consider regulatory policy relative to blue light at night on street lights, and on residential lighting, and we're going to start regulating in hospital lighting. So this is coming. If you look at all the distributions of different light sources, the shorter wavelengths, the blue-green, are the most profound in terms of melanopsin disruption. But the ambers, the oranges, the reds, ambers, much less so. So this is an area of a lot of work. So sleep was one of the big drivers on this work, with the idea that what could we be doing to really reduce the melanopsin disruption and limiting the blue light at night in order to sustain sleep in these kinds of environments. Deep interest on this from the hospital community. So a number of different factors outcoming from our partners and the kinds of things that they're interested in. Of course, improving sleep is a big driver for our hospital partners. Things like depression or reducing length of stay, easing pain. It turns out that safety, trips and falls, are also a big interest within the hospital design community, and I'm going to spend some time on that. Patient experience also scores very, very high relative to the design community. So these are things that are driving our partners, what they're